Did you know there are ideas inside your mind, heart, and spirit that no one has ever thought of before? And the beauty is that these ideas want to come out of you. But the sad part is that for most of you, it's not going to happen because of your false self. Your fear, your guilt, and shame will shut down your creative and imaginative true self. So, how can you overcome that? My special guest, Jamie Winship, is going to help us understand how to enter our true identity. Stay tuned. How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. It is a real delight this week to have my special guest, Jamie Winship. And I came across Jamie's book about 3 months ago. And I just told him that I think it's probably in my top 5 books because he is speaking the language that I've been speaking for years about the importance of understanding your purpose and your identity and how that's tied to really experiencing the supernatural in your life. And Jamie's a great storyteller, and watching many of his YouTube videos, he has some powerful stories that illustrate his teaching. It's one thing to teach, but it's another thing to experience the aspect of transformation and the supernatural in the lives of people. And so, Jamie, it's good to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
You know, one of the core things we're talking about today is we're going to look at this book, Living Fearless, Exchanging the Lives of the World for the Liberating Truth of God. I want to just share the back cover of this book as a backdrop for what we're going to talk about today. After decades living and working in conflict zones, Jamie Winship discovered an important truth. All human conflict originates from fear, and fear originates from a false view of God, ourselves, and others. Until we exchange what's false for what's real, we will never experience the true freedom of our identity in Christ. In Living Fearless, Winship takes you on a journey of telling yourself the truth, changing your mindset, and experiencing actual life transformation that leads to radical courage in the face of all that life throws at you. With humor, clarity, and real-life practicality, this book is your invitation to listen closely to what God is trying to say to you about himself, about the person he created you to be, and about all the other people he created and loves. If you want to discover an incredible difference abiding in Christ will make in your life and faith, get ready to do a new thing with God. Get ready to live fearlessly. So, Jamie, you have a very interesting beginning to your calling, and quite humorous, actually. I wonder if you'd share a little bit about that movie theater experience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I grew up in my family. My mom was a very strict independent Baptist, and which the benefit of that is, of course, like really knowing the word. And I, to this day, love the Bible, love the scriptures. The disadvantage was the regulations on top of that. And so, we weren't allowed to listen to music, outside of church music or go to movies or things like that. So, which was always interesting to me. My dad was not a believer, and so he had a different perspective on things. But I was very curious about the whole movie thing. So by the time I was in 8th grade, I had friends going to the movie theater, and I'm from Washington, D.C. It's not, it's like I lived in a pretty big metropolitan area. And so I was just curious about movies. My friends were going. So I decided to go to a movie theater, just go into a movie and see what the whole big deal was. And it's funny, I felt really nervous and guilty going into the movie theater. just because I was always told that in effect, God wasn't able to go to a movie theater, like it was too dark, too evil. So when I went into the theater and I just went into a movie, I didn't even pay attention to what the movie actually was. I just wanted to see. And
Mm.
so I went into the movie theater and, the lights go down and I'm sitting way in the back and this movie comes on and the movie is the movie Serpico, which is Al Pacino playing the real life New York City police officer, Frank Serpico, who I have actually the first edition of I have a little shelf over here with Al Pacino and Frank Serpico and my badge and all my stuff in the police department. And so I'm watching this movie starts and for anyone that's ever seen the movie Serpico, which is in 1973, I think, it starts with him going to the hospital. He's been shot. And so anyway, this movie starts and I'm watching this police officer and it's kind of going in reverse, the story of this young police officer, and he's ethical and vigilant and all that, and he figures out that his squad is on the take, they're corrupt, and he doesn't want to participate, and so they isolate him, and it's this whole journey through the police department, maintaining his integrity and all. And it just affects me so deeply. So I was 14 years old, and I am just overwhelmed with emotion, and I don't know exactly why, and I don't know exactly who or what it is affecting me because I don't associate it with God because of my location. And so, but I just cry, I just weep. And as the movie progresses, I realize that the movie is, what I would later say is naming me. And
Mm.
this happens a lot in the arts, especially beautiful arts, where art calls out to people and beauty names people, like in the sublime. And so I was having this experience, and the movie was naming me, and I felt like I needed to make some kind of decision as a result of this encounter I'm having in the movie theater. So, like a good independent Baptist, I decided I needed to go forward at the end of the movie. And so that's what I did. At the end of the movie, I went forward. Everyone was walking out. I went forward. I went up on the little stage in the theater and I just turned around and faced outward and I said to God or whoever was challenging me at this level and meeting me at this deep emotional level, I just said, that's what I want to be. I want to be that character that I saw portrayed. I wanted to be, and to me, that was a police officer, and it was a certain kind of police officer. And so I just made a commitment there that day in eighth grade that I was going to be that, um, what I saw on the screen. And I'm 64 now. So 60 years later, I've never wavered from that, what happened to me that day. It was probably the greatest emotional, spiritual experience I'd ever had in my life. And it's one of the top, maybe three in my entire life. But the decision I made that day, I've never wavered from it, not one day. And that was the beginning of me understanding who I am, my deep identity that like kind of like when Peter tells Jesus that you're the Christ, you're the anointed one, and Jesus says flesh and blood can't reveal that to you, only the Father. That's what it felt like to me. I could have had 10 people sitting there telling you ought to be a police officer one day, would have never had the impact that spiritual encounter had in that, very dark place. So that's how I started. Then by the time I was 23, I was in the police department.
So one of the things that I believe God has given you an insight in that is unlike anybody else. You often talk about you cannot really fulfill God's purposes unless you understand your identity and you move away from false beliefs about yourself and what you believe about yourself.
Right.
And before we get into how you came to that, tell me, is there a difference in your mind between our identity and our purpose?
Oh yeah, huge. Yeah, simply because so in the universe, the reality that we live in, and I think this is important to me. I'm just writing on this topic. So when you look at the scriptures, starting in Genesis and all the way through, nobody's talking about Christian versus non-Christian, biblical versus non. No one uses that language. the Jesus isn't going around saying, this is a biblical worldview or this is a Christian world. No one talks like that. That's all our own invention. What they're talking about, what the scriptures are talking about, is what is true and what is not true. That's it. That's all there is. What's true and what's not true. So in our universe, so it doesn't matter whether I'm talking to a Christian or a non-Christian, if the discussion is just between us, what's true and not true? What's true about you? What's not true about you? And so in our universe, what's true is that the only organizing principle in our reality is identity. Any living system, its only organizing principle is identity. And so if that's true, then the identity precedes function or vocation. So being informs doing. I mean, this is Genesis forward. Being informs doing. So if you're getting your sense of being from doing, you're upside down. So being informs doing. So at the cellular level, all the way up to civilization level, if a living organism is operating in its true, authentic self, you can tell because it's an open system, it's reciprocal and connected to everything around it. It's actually sacrificial for the benefit of the others. And it grows, and everything grows as a result. When the organism, when its identity is flawed or corrupted, it immediately becomes a closed system, and it will start to feed on itself, and everything around it becomes parasitic. And so if you have a cell that's healthy, it blends into the connectedness of the reality that it's in. And when it's corrupted, it becomes cancer, and it'll destroy everything around it. So if you have a country that's operating in its true identity, the country is it's like Jesus or an individual. They're other focused, self-emptying, unconditional love for their enemy. That's the model of Jesus. And when they're not, they become self-protective and self-promotional, which creates conflict immediately. So being is the most important thing to focus on, because how good I am as a police officer, if I'm just trying to be functionally a good police officer, isn't redemptive to the people around me. I might have the most felony arrests of anyone, and all of that, and be just as destructive as anybody else. So I can succeed in my vocation in an absolute false identity. That is no measurement, right? But I can't bring wholeness and resiliency to the people around me and wellness unless I'm operating in my true identity. So yeah, being always precedes doing.
Yeah. So one of the things you talk about in the book is just the core beliefs that people have is often what sabotages their life. And expound a little bit on what is a core belief and how do people adopt those core beliefs?
Yeah, well, I mean, simply, generally speaking, all thinking is memory mostly. So when I'm in a conversation with a person, everything they're usually telling me is just stuff that they've learned in the past, right? And so they're just operating on memory, which is not the prefrontal cortex of their brain. In the prefrontal cortex, you're operating in creativity and imagination, and it's where dreams and visions and prayer and in innovation all occur in the prefrontal cortex. Most of us are living in the amygdala, which is fear, guilt, and shame, self-protection, self-promotion based on measurement systems of production. So when I ask a person something like, and this is where you get into talking about fear, but if I'm asking a person, tell me what you're afraid of in life, let's say, for example, because all of us struggle with fear, guilt, and shame. But if I say, what are you most afraid of currently in your life? And they'll answer, something, and I'll just keep, because all humans are exactly the same. There's no difference in any of us in terms of what scares us, whether I'm a Muslim or a Chinese atheist or an American evangelical, are all afraid of the same thing. And so they'll say, I'm afraid of, let's say, ultimately failure or rejection. So then my first question is, okay, but you weren't born afraid of rejection. You weren't born afraid of failure. The person who's afraid of failure is because they consider themselves a failure, right? So when I'll say I'm afraid of failure, so make an identity statement about that. I am a failure. Okay, where did you learn that? That was taught to you. The to Jesus was rejected and completely unafraid of it. It didn't inform anything about how he viewed himself, the fact that he was completely rejected. We pull all kinds of identity out of someone rejecting us, and we become I am rejected. So to understand rejection as the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, you have to be taught that. So we have to learn all of these things. Um, Otherwise, humans are inoffendable. In their true self, you're inoffendable. Like you don't get your identity from what you do, what you have, and what people think about you, unless you're taught that's where your identity comes from. Once you learn that that's where it comes from, now you're trapped in that.
Yeah, I had a friend who would say that whenever you allow another person to define who you are, you've made that person an idol, and they're determining what your identity is instead of God, and that gets them off the track of in a number of different ways.
Right. So your core identity, it's back to what the scripture is always saying. Is your core identity true or false? That's really all you're asking. How do we know when it's true? Because to know and experience truth liberates humans. When any human who knows and experiences truth, even difficult truth, it brings liberation. Falsehood creates separation and death. That's what it does. Because it moves you away from the truth of who you are. And once you've lost the true sense of who you are, then you're gaining your identity, as you just said, from somewhere else or some job or something. So I'm just writing this section on wholeness and resiliency. And Navy SEALs, Special Forces are some of the most resilient people we have as examples. And their suicide rate is 11 a day.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So when you go to interview special ops people, which we do, um, the reason the suicide rate is so high is because they get their identity from their vocation. And so when that vocation is over, they have nothing left. Or when they realize deep down, this actually isn't an identity, they fall apart. The same with anybody, right? And so those core beliefs the special ops people that are able to navigate all of that is because their identity is in place before the vocation, kind of to your original question. So that's why it's so important to start at that level and to start as young as possible, helping people understand identity.
Yeah, so on page 29, you say the gates of hell cannot stand against us moving in our true identity. But if we take it one step outside of that identity, we're done, we're finished, it's over. Um, can you tell us a story about maybe someone you encountered that was really stuck in a false identity and moved them into the truth of identity and what happened as a result?
Yeah. I mean, we work in this every day with people. This is what we do with people. Yeah. So I was just telling the story. So I'll just give you like because they ripple effect on it on one another. So I was working in a major metropolitan area in the U.S. And the I was working with a psychiatrist approached me, probably the most successful psychiatrist in this city, who happened to be a believer. And he told me, he said, I work with police officers who are disciplinary problems. The police department refers discipline problems to me. And when I meet with them, because I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a medical doctor, I deal a lot in, managing prescriptions and those kinds of things. He said, but I'm running into people that are violent or that kind of thing prescribing a medication, I feel like as a believer isn't the best thing, but I don't know what to do with them. And he said, I know the kind of work you do, referring to me. can I refer these officers to you? And if I do, what would you do with them? So I said back to the psychiatrist, because remember, my question, being a psychiatrist is not an identity. So I always say to people before I work with them, I'm happy to do this with you, but I want to know who you are, who you are, before I help them discover. So is it okay with you if you and I just work through identity together first, and then we can decide, should we be together on this? And he said he thought that was really interesting. So we met at a lunch in this outdoor cafe thing. We met. And so the more he and I talked, and of course he knows all the theory. He's from Harvard, and he knew everything that was happening and the way I was talking about the brain and all that. And I said to him, I guess, don't keep turning this into the science of the brain. Just keep, I know you know that, but let's stay it on you and human. And the more we talked, I asked him, I said, I always ask people two questions. Tell me in your life where you experience fear currently. That's one. And then the other question I ask people is, do you have joy? I ask my own kids this every time I talk to them. Are you afraid of anything? The fear points to lie-based thinking. And do you have joy? Joy is the fruit of the spirit. So if they don't have fear, but they don't have joy, then you're operating at sort of zero tolerance. You're not like progressing. So I asked him about fear. He said, no, he's successful, he's wealthy, he's got a great marriage, all that. Do you have joy? And he was silent. Do you have joy? And he was like, gosh, I've never thought of that. And he said, you know what? I don't.
Mm.
And I said, okay, so where in your life did you can't manufacture joy. It's a fruit of the spirit. Where did you lose it? And wow, he and I got into this very young in his life. He was taught that he had to sacrifice joy to be disciplined and successful because of competition in his field. He
Mm.
was taught that by his parents. So no parties, no dating. He said, I can remember sitting in the library at Harvard while people are out, going to things, and I can't go because I might be number 2 or 3. And so he was taught that to sacrifice joy was part of being successful. So then he and I did a listening exercise about joy, and we were in that restaurant until they closed that night. It was
Uh-huh.
so moving to him. So then the joy factor caused him to look at his vocation in a completely different way, because you can't give away what you don't have. And so if you have joy overflowing, you can help others walk into joy. But if you don't have it, but you will give away what you do have. So if you have fear, and so we worked through that experience. And then the first officer he refers to me after his own encounter with joy was a guy they were going to fire because it was a third offense of violence on the job. He sent that guy to me. I work with that guy. And my question to that guy is, who are you mad at? And when did you first get mad? Which we can talk about anger in a second, because that's so important to understand that. Anyway, he and I worked through anger, and his anger was producing in him because as a young kid, he got beat up by a certain ethnic group. He's mad at him. Now he's a police officer. That doesn't just go away because you went through the police academy. And so on the job, his anger comes out in certain situations. So we went back to the time in his life where he was the victim of that, worked through it. But then as a test scenario, I made it so that we took him into the Middle East and left him alone in a neighborhood for 2 weeks of the group that he had the biggest problem with. And I said, I'm going to leave you in there with no badge and no gun. You have no power, no authority, and you're the only one. You better learn to get along with these folks because you can get hurt. And so he went in there well, though. He was whole. Put him in the situation, and he developed remarkable relationships in that situation. Bring him back into the States, put him back on the police department, and his first night on midnights, he pulls a car over that's a disaster. Everything's broken in the car. It's dangerous to drive. And when he goes up to the car, it's Palestinians in the car. Exactly where he had spent the last 2 weeks. Normally in this situation, he would react quite aggressively, and Everything was wrong with the car. The guy didn't have a license, all of that. It's a perfect situation for, arrest, tow the car. Instead, he tells them the car is dangerous. You're going to hurt yourself. Let me help you. Let me help you with the situation. He takes them to where he said, I'll take care of the car. Let me give you a ride home. The Palestinian guy says, my wife just arrived. Haven't seen her in 5 years. He takes the guy to their house. It's this terrible rental situation. The police officers, how much do you pay for this rent? The guy tells him it's way overpriced. He goes, give me the name of the landlord. The police officer goes to the landlord, wakes him up and says, you cannot overcharge these people like you're doing. This is illegal. And I will come for you in the morning. And you better have a place for these people that's fair and healthy. And then to help the Palestinians through the night, he goes and wakes up the mosque leader of the local mosque and gets the mosque leader to find them a place to stay until the house is repaired. He does all that in one shift. His sergeant's like, the mosque leader calls the police department and said, I've never seen officers like this. This is incredible. This makes our community want to help, all this stuff. One shift. All that because the psychiatrist moved into the truth of who he is. Joy. And he brought it to his vocation. Then he's able to bring it to the police officer. And so not only do you see healing in the officer, but healing between the communities like that. And so this is the way we overcome racism, prejudice, violence, conflict, is when the truth of my being matches the way of my being. And that's the goal. And the gates of hell can't stop that.
Yeah, you say on page 34, there are ideas inside your mind, heart, and spirit that no one has ever thought of before. And the beauty is that these ideas want to come out of you. The sad part is that for most of you, it's not going to happen because of your false belief. Your fear, your guilt, and shame will shut down your creative and imaginative true self.
Right.
Now, one of the things in your book, you talk about a guy that you worked with. As I understand it, the movie Born Identity was kind of based around who the real life character was. Tell us a little bit about him and the impact you had with him.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that people can't do what they've never seen. So whenever a person writes a movie or has a literature idea, it's because they had the image is already present in their mind. There's a lot of ramifications to this. And so when you go to a movie like The Born Identity or one of those kind of movies, no matter how much Hollywood is in there, there's an original idea that's actually true. And so when I talk about this guy, I call him Jason Bourne because he is that person. He speaks multiple languages. He's an intelligence guy. He's just, I mean, he's a crack sniper, but he's got a PhD in some kind of philosophy, and he's just like this amazing James Bond kind of guy. And he's wealthy because he's so good at what he does, his job. And so when I met him, that was really clear right when I first met him. I was doing a lecture in DC on this kind of stuff and talking about how do you infiltrate a terrorist organization and not kill everybody, but win everybody. Like how much more effective that is at ending conflict than if you go kill everyone and then they're all their cousins and everyone are now your enemy. It just never ends. And so when I was done that, he walks up to me and he says, and he's younger than I am, and he says, how do I know you're the real deal? And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, anyone can stand up and tell stories. And I said, yeah, you're exactly right. He said, how do I know that you're the real deal? And I said, well, if I tell you I'm the real deal, that's not going to help because anyone can say that. He laughed and he said, yeah. And I said, so what has to happen is you have to come with me. Come with me to a location or a situation that I'm afraid of and watch what happens. And then you can decide, not if I'm the real deal. That's not really his question. Is God the real deal? That's really what you want to know. And so I said, I'll set up a scenario. He has to get clearance to go into it. But and I'll take you to a place I don't even like to go. And so he agreed and we worked that out and we went together. We've been 2 times now to this very difficult, violent location. And it was in that situation that he, for the first time, got to see God move and speak strategically in a situation that we couldn't really resolve. You got to watch it happen. And as a result of that, and this is important when you're thinking about human beings, when he watched all that happen, he became convinced, okay, God is real. This is a real, what Jamie's talking about is real. Experientially, it's true, which allowed him then to ask me the real question that he wanted to ask me about his own life. And I thought that's really important. It's like you don't just go up to a person and because you're looking for someone to give you a quick answer to something, you want to know if the person I'm asking is the right identity to speak to the issue that I'm dealing with. Not just anybody, not just someone that has a credential like the psychiatrist, a joyless psychiatrist. How helpful is that? But a psychiatrist who's well trained and understands joy and experiences joy, I want to be with that guy. So that's what this guy was asked. If you're the real deal and God really works with you and through you, if I see that, okay, that gives me the freedom now to ask you the real question in my heart, which is about my own personal life. That's how we see Muslims come to faith all the time, is when they get to that place.
Mm.
And most of us don't want to get there. We just want to preach a sermon or give the apologetics approach to something because it doesn't require that we ourselves are experiencing personally what we're going to talk about. And that's sad because then we're just exchanging information and information doesn't transform people.
Mm. That's an amazing transformation truth that so and we didn't talk about this in the beginning, but you spent over 30 years in the Muslim world, and I mean your book talks about some incredible experiences that have breakthroughs that the pastors in America just they blow their mind. But one of the encounters you had that I thought was very humorous was when you guys landed in the desert and you were meeting with some somewhat adversarial type Muslims in a tent, and you had a place setting for you and your partners, and they kept adding a place setting for another person. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, that was with my Jason Bourne buddy. He was with me on that one too. Yeah, so in the culture that we were in, we were out in the desert, Sahara Desert, and so in a tent culture, Bedouin-like culture. And so in the custom of the tribe we were with, and the tribe is 300,000 people, so it's not like small, they're massive. And they're fighters. They've been at war for 35 years. That's all they know how to do is fight. And so it's a hostile situation. And so when you have to go in there at night for different reasons. And so when they bring you in, they have to guide you in. Then you sleep, and the next morning you wake up. They have there's the tents are massive, and you go in this other room in the tent, and they have a table on the floor. You sit down on the floor, and they set places for you to eat because it's impolite for them to watch their guests eat. So they don't come in the room till you're done. And so there was three of us, and they set four places, and one of the guys with me said, why are there four places if there's three of us? And I said, I don't know. I've never seen them do this before. I've never experienced this. And every time we would go to eat, there'd be this fourth place. And so finally, actually, the Jason Bourne guy asked the elders when we were meeting with them, like, why are you setting four places when there's only three of us? And the elder said, what do you mean there's only three? There's four of you. There's four of you. And my friend says, there are? And he goes, well, not right here. The other guy, your security guy, the one that stands outside all the time, that one, doesn't he eat? And my friend looks at me and goes, hey, did you know we have a security guy? Well, as soon as they said that, then I knew what they were talking about because I've had this experience before in other places where people I'm with will see another person with us, or we can actually see the other person. But it's more common they see it and we don't because it's not for our benefit, it's for theirs. And so the elder said, yeah, the one who stands guard while you guys are asleep, that guy, when does he come in and eat? And he's outside right now. We all passed him walking in here, that guy. And so Jason Bourne's telling me that, and I start to laugh. And Jason Bourne says to the elder, "What does he look like?" And the elder says, "You don't know what your own guy looks like?" And then they realize that we can't see him. The elders do, the Muslims. And so the Muslims start using the word malaikat, which means angel. They start saying malaika Allah. They have an angel of God with them. That's their security person. And then they said, we were wondering about him because he guards you with a sword. And they said, we've never seen a security guy with a sword like that. So then our reputation was when we were moving around in this very tense, because there were leaders there that wanted us dead so bad. They were yelling for it in the meetings we were in. And we couldn't figure quite why there was such restraint with us, because it was just three of us. We were totally alone out in the middle of the desert, that they were so restrained in how they dealt with us, even though they were mad. And then we realized it's because they were afraid of this guard. And then when they realized it was an angel guard, then they realized, wow, you guys are here because God put you here. And that opened up, the way the whole conversation went in a different direction.
Awesome. So we're getting close to the end here. One of the things that you say, it's very important that we be able to hear God's voice. It's key to walking in our identity. Mm-hmm. How do you suggest people develop a listening heart or a listening ear to hear God?
Yeah, well, that's really important, because I was raised that God doesn't speak anymore, that he gave us the Bible and that's it. The challenge with that is the Bible doesn't have an answer for every situation that I find myself in. But what you do observe in the scriptures is that how did people know what to do? They accessed God. I mean, from the beginning to the end, that's what they're doing. They're asking God for wisdom. They're asking for guidance. And so why aren't we doing that in a way that's tactical and strategic? So if I'm in a situation and I'm asking the Lord, give us wisdom in what to do right now in this situation, how is he going to communicate it to us? Like, I don't have time to look up verses, and it's got to be like through the Spirit. You have the mind of Christ, you have the Spirit of the living God. You have to develop the communicative style that you uniquely have with God. And so it's like my wife can call me on the phone. I don't have to see who it is. As soon as I hear her voice, I know it's her. So you want to develop a relationship with the Lord that as soon as he communicates to you, however that is, with an idea, with a thought, with something you see externally, you just my sheep hear my voice. They recognize my voice because I call them by name. That's a discipline to practice and learn. How do I tell the idea from God as opposed to my idea? How do I know his leading when I would be like, there's no way that's a good idea, but I know the voice of the Lord. You want to get to that level, and it's from practice, 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 practice. And you develop listening skills alone in the quiet with Jesus by asking him questions and just waiting and writing down ideas. We say that hearing from God is the free flow of thoughts that flow through my mind when I fix my eyes on Jesus and ask him a question. When I'm teaching guys how to do this, it's like, let's ask God a question right now. Let's fix our eyes on Christ, because Christ is the exact representation of the invisible God. Christ is the only thing we can image forth when we want to try and see God. It's Jesus. So we fix our eyes on Jesus, and let's ask him a question. Lord, what's the most important thing you want me to know right now in this moment? And then we just sit and listen and start writing down or saying to each other what comes through our mind. And you start to develop this skill of recognizing, distilling his voice out from the other voices. The example I always give of this is when I was a rookie cop, my training officer said to me on the first night, you got to be able to hear your scout number when they call you. You got to hear it, and you have to be able to respond to that number. That radio is your lifeline to every resource, every help, anything, and for people to know where you are. And I said, okay, but it's a big department, and there's a lot of people talking on the radio, and all you're ever going to hear is 510. That's how you're going to hear your name, 510. But they're calling 510, 710, 610, 520. They're calling all these numbers all the time. And I said, okay, I got to learn to hear that voice. And he said, okay, they've already called you 3 times. So now if you put me on a lie detector and said, did they call you? I would say no and be telling the truth, except I'm wrong. Do you see that? So people say, I never hear God, God doesn't speak. You're wrong. But it's because you haven't trained, you've trained to hear every other voice but his. And I'll tell you, you can hear the enemy loud and clear. Last thing I'll say about that is I was doing a thing with 50 public school principals, and I walked into the room and I said, how many of you can hear a voice this morning in your head telling you you're not as good as you could be, that you're not that great of a principal? These are all PhDs in education, that you're not a good spouse. All of them raised their hand. They can all hear that voice. Nobody has a question about that voice being real and detrimental. Then I said, raise your hand if you heard a voice saying, you're amazing, you're enough, well done, let's learn together. How many of you heard that voice? Nobody.
Mm.
And so all we're saying is we're going to shut down the one and turn up the other. That's all because they're there all the time, both of them. But you're trained to hear the negative. You're trained to hear the liar and respond to the liar instead of shutting down the liar and responding to what's true about you, about the world you're in. Once you start responding to what's true, then you start to experience freedom. And
Awesome.
so practice, 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 shutting down the lie and turning up the truth. And as you do it in solitude and in quiet, it's just like when I was a cop, I started just listening to the radio with my head down next to it. And that's how you learn. And then my FTO, my trainer says, okay, now you got to learn to drive in a high-speed pursuit and hear that voice and communicate to that voice in the worst nightmare. And you just learn, because this is the reality that we're in, everything's a process. God made this world like this. You start here and you get to here. You work to here. That's how everything works. If you think you're going to skip that, you're not living in truth. It's not magic. It's a process. And so the more I learn to hear God, then God says to me, okay, let's go into a storm and listen. And then let's go into a hurricane and let's go into the desert of the Sahara. And you hear not only for yourself, for other people. He just keeps ratcheting it up so that we become more and more mature in all of it. But it's a process, and you can stop it anytime you want. You can quit anytime you want. If you're content to hear him alone in the corner of your house, that's where you'll always end up. But if you want to hear him in a storm walking on water, he'll take you there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we've been talking about the book Living Fearless and exchanging the lives of the world for the liberating truth of God. It's, this book is loaded with truth, but it's also very entertaining because of the stories. And he's a great storyteller. And if you want to hear some great stories, go on YouTube and just search Jamie's name. He's got a lot of great sessions on there. We're going to put his website is identityexchange.com, identityexchange.com. We'll put the link to the book also in the notes, or you can go on that website. So, Jamie, as you look at the world we're living in, what do you see taking place in our world?
We need identity and wholeness really bad. Absolutely. The sad thing is we're not going to do it. I mean, we keep just making, I'm talking about as believers. We just keep making the same mistakes. We keep making the exact same mistakes over and over again because all we know how to do is try and move into positions of power and control. That's all we know. And it doesn't take the Holy Spirit to do that. I mean, in fact, you could probably do it better without the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit's going to talk about love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, this kind of thing, and not about power and control. So it's frustrating. That's the book I'm working on right now is on worldview. And it's just, we're born again believers living in a completely false worldview. And so we end up looking just like the world. Even though we try to not look like it, we end up, there's no real difference between how I'm operating and a person who's not a believer, ultimately. So that's really what we're trying to work on, is how do we help develop models which the scriptures talk about all the time, but we don't read the scriptures in the same worldview that Moses is presenting the world. Moses is the one who writes the really the textbook on worldviews. He's the one. So he's the one telling the story of all of Genesis. Moses is telling every story that we have up until the Exodus. And so you have one person telling the story of Abraham, the story of, so like, it's like a writer for a screenplay. He has a certain theme that he wants you to get. And so he's not writing a science book. He's writing to a group of slaves. And he's going to take a population of slaves and walk them into being a kind of governing system that's never been seen before on the planet. And it's remarkable how he does that, so like when he goes in, when he's in with God, getting the download on how to present this, it's just remarkable, because I just wrote it. You know, Jonathan Edwards and Luther and Calvin and all the church fathers say that who Moses was talking to in the burning bush was Jesus, like the incarnate Christ. So Moses is having a Jesus encounter, and then even in the pillar and the cloud, anytime the church fathers believed, anytime you could see God, it was the incarnate one. Right? Because you can't see God and live. And so Moses is having these interactions with the God he can see, cloud, fire, bush, like that. And then he's coming to and relating to people. So he's basically telling the story of in the beginning as if Jesus was telling it. It's remarkable. I mean, it's just so, this is why the scriptures are so powerful. And the way we read them is like, it's this sort of this thin, book of rules and regulations, and so he's telling this story, and he's saying to these slave people, the worldview that you've been inside of for 1,400 years and that the whole rest of the world is operating in is false. The whole thing is, every part of it's false. And to understand the true worldview, we have to go back and say, in the beginning, the truth was established, and this is what it looks like. And because we've lost track of what the truth is, we think the lie is true, and we live like it's true. So you have Moses versus Pharaoh is the Old Testament, kingdom versus empire. And then in the New Testament, it's Jesus versus Caesar. It's the same issue, kingdom versus empire. And the hardest thing for us as humans is to stay out of empire, because that's what we're trained in all the time. Churches are empire builders. Mission agencies are empire builders. They're all built on production. Like, how much can you produce for the good of this thing? And God never created anyone to produce for him. Never.
Awesome.
So that's the challenge for us.
Yeah.
Let's face it, we all want to make a difference. We want to live for Christ. We want our work to have meaning deep down. We all want to live a larger story to make a difference in the world. But how do we do this? It doesn't just happen. We must invest in our spiritual and professional life that involves spiritual mentoring and training. But where do we go to get that kind of spiritual mentoring and professional training? Is it at church, a conference, a school? The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is the answer to that question, founded by Os Hillman. He is a pioneer in marketplace ministry and has had a 40-year advertising and business career, working with clients like American Express, Steinway Pianos, Thomas Nelson Publishers, and a host of other successful companies. He understands the challenge of living for Christ in a pressure-packed business environment. He created the Change Agent Master Mentor Program to help leaders. Us will help you realize your dream of being successful in your career and having an influence on your world. The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is designed for you to realize your larger story, to understand your purpose, to learn and apply your faith life to your work life from us and other proven workspace leaders who are doing it. Our online course and group mentoring will help you become God's change agent, to be a cultural influencer and succeed in your work-life call, and grow in your relationship with God and with other members of the Change Agent Master Mentor Program. Come join us. Let's influence the world together. www.camastermentor.com.
So Jamie, thank you so much for taking
Yep.
some time with us and imparting this to our audience. We appreciate all you're doing, and Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.